Hello and welcome. My name is Edseth-Griffin, and today we're going to be answering the question of what is restorative justice? It's a surprisingly complicated question to answer. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple different definitions I've come across in my work, break them down into digestible bites for you, and then by the end of the video, we're going to land on what definition I'll be using for the sake of discussion on this channel, just so we're all on the same page. Let's start with a definition from Fania Davis in the Little Book of Restorative Justice, Black Lives, Healing, and U.S. Social Transformation. She says, I got it pulled up down here. Restorative justice is a justice that seeks not to punish, but to heal. A justice that is not about getting even, but about getting well. A justice that seeks to transform broken lives, relationships, and communities rather than damage them further. A justice that seeks reconciliation rather than a deepening of conflict. A justice that seeks to make right the wrong rather than adding to the original wrong. A healing justice rather than punishing justice. A restorative justice rather than a retributive justice. Thank you, Fania. So, let's break it down. First, there's a turn away from punishment and towards healing. Punishment is something that's very normalized in our culture. I think a lot of us would agree. It shows up in our criminal justice system, in our schools, in child rearing, in popular media, all these places as a response to harm or crime. But Davis asks us to problematize this for ourselves. Chew on this question for a moment. Why do we punish? I'll wait. Odds are you came up with one or multiple of the following answers. Deterrence. People will be less inclined to cause harm or commit crime if they fear the punishment for doing so. Incapacitation. If we lock people up or otherwise harm them, they will be unable to commit further crime or harm. Rehabilitation or reform. Through punishment, we can reduce crime or harm by invoking a change in a person's character. And retribution. When people cause harm, they deserve to have harm caused to them. In other words, an eye for an eye. In penology, which is the study of criminal punishment, these are considered the typical justifications for punishment. There's plenty of evidence against outcome based justifications, but that's a topic for another video. Punishment is something that needs to be justified because it involves doing something that would, in any other circumstance, be reprehensible, causing harm. If we can agree that punishment is something that needs to be justified because it involves hurting people, and we can, then what do we do instead? How can we move away from it? You'll notice Davis already gives us an answer to this: healing. She says it's not about getting even, but about getting well. Let me orient you to one of my favorite metaphors to explain this idea. A community can be thought of as a quilt, a patchwork blanket. When there's a tear in the quilt, it doesn't just affect one square, it affects the entire blanket. So, as RJ practitioners, we are the quilters. When a quilter's quilt is damaged, their goal is to repair the damage. They can't fix a blanket by punching the person who cut it. In the rest of her definition, Davis rewords this sentiment a number of times, both for emphasis and for clarity. At the same time, she builds this dichotomy between restorative justice and punitive justice. I'm going to talk more about that in another video if you're interested, but for now, we're going to move on to our second definition. Our second definition comes to us from Howard Zehr in the Little Book of Restorative Justice. Zehr focuses his definition on three pillars. The first is harms and needs. When harm is caused, it is usually the result of and creates unmet needs. The second is obligations. When people's needs are unmet, it is the obligation of stakeholders to make sure they become met. The third pillar is engagement. Stakeholders should be kept informed and involved throughout the repair process. Their stories should be told, and all outcomes should be reached in consensus. By the way, I use these little books of restorative justice a lot because I just think they're a good starting point for anyone who wants to talk about restorative justice stuff and learn about it. So go do some shopping. Zare uses these pillars to inform his definition. Got it right here. Restorative justice is an approach to achieving justice that involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense or harm to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. Thank you, Howard. Breaking down Zare's definition, let's just start with what he means by justice. I think for the purposes of this video and this definition, it's fair to relate it to Fania Davis's definition and just say justice means meeting people's needs. Zare's definition also emphasizes a circle of stakeholders and their collective power to repair harm. When someone is harmed, only they can tell us what they need. And when someone causes harm, only they can tell us why that happened and what sort of supports they need in order to not do it again. And as a community, it is our responsibility to hold each other accountable, be accountable ourselves, and take care of each other. Finally, Zare recenters us on the importance of healing, with the acknowledgement that that doesn't always mean putting things back to the way they were before the harm was caused. Sometimes that just isn't possible. Going back to the quilt, for instance, repairing the tear in the quilt doesn't mean it's going to look the exact same as it did before the tear was created. You might need to put a new patch over it or use a different thread. However you do it, it's going to look a little different. Repairing it just means putting it back together so we can keep using it. Now that we've spent some time with these two different definitions of restorative justice, I think we have a pretty good idea of what our definition needs. The first essential piece of our definition is healing. Healing in this case as opposed to punishing. The way I see it, there is no justice without healing, and there is no healing without justice. This looks like accountability, understanding, and support for everybody involved in an instance of harm. But most importantly, this means meeting people's needs. Healing and meeting people's needs are honestly pretty interchangeable for me, but I think healing is more encapsulating of the idea I'm trying to get across. The second essential piece is context. I brushed over the storytelling portion of Zare's engagement pillar a little bit, but it's actually pretty important. The only way we can learn about people's needs and know how to meet them and really understand them is to gain context. This looks like listening to their stories. This looks like learning about their personal life circumstances and having empathy for them. Without context, it becomes very difficult to do any real healing. The third essential piece is humanity. This one doesn't get talked about half as much as I think it should. Humanity here means an understanding that we will all, every one of us, cause harm to other people, and that despite that, we are all still deserving of respect and love. This is very much tied to empathy. The fact of the matter is, we can't rely on people to be better than people have ever been. People hurt each other all the time, and so it doesn't make any sense to rely on them not to. There's a reason we say, I'm only human, after all. Finally, we need to answer the question, what is it actually? Is restorative justice a response to harm, a philosophy, a way of life, a religion? I can't recall where I read this, but I do remember who wrote it. Since I can't find the exact article again, I'm just going to have to do my best to recreate what she said. Kathleen Daly, who is, I believe, a criminology professor at Griffith University, once argued that restorative justice needs to have its definition restricted down to, essentially, a response to harm. She said this because restorative justice has a bit of a clarity problem. I agree with her that RJ has a clarity problem. That's sort of the crux of this video. But I can't agree that it's just a response to harm. In my experience, it's been so much more than that. And so calling it just a way to respond when people hurt each other just doesn't make sense to me. RJ's problem of wide ranging definitions and practices definitely does need to be addressed, but I don't think reducing it to a response to harm is necessarily accurate. It just feels so limiting. Maybe you disagree with me, but it's my video and my channel, so I'm just going to follow my heart on this one. Okay, I think we have enough to write out our working definition of restorative justice. Once again, I have it right here. Restorative justice is a way of life characterized by an understanding of the shared humanity of all persons and peoples, a desire to understand them, and a desire to see their needs met. This definition sounds good to me. It doesn't cover everything that falls under the RJ umbrella, but it covers a lot and it's concise. And besides, coming up with a universal, all encompassing definition is pretty far outside the scope of one white guy on YouTube. This is our definition that we're going to use in this space, and we're free to revise it whenever we see fit. That's the video, folks. I feel pretty good about where we landed, and I think we covered some beautiful ground on the way there. Like I said, my definition is not comprehensive, but it serves the purpose we need it for, and I'm excited to explore it more in future videos. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.